All right, everyone. I got a special guest on today. His channel is Cali, Central Cali Certified. It's right there in his name. You want to look it up. He's got some good stories. He's got a lot of good knowledge on recent history and what's happening in California. But today we're going to tell his story because he's been through a lot just on the little bit I know. So go ahead, brother. Take it away.
All right. My name is Brandon. My channel is Central Cali Certified. Really basically like growing up, the neighborhood I was in was like a northerner neighborhood. And we moved out to Riverbank or Modesto when I was about 6 years old, when my mom and my dad were splitting up. And up till that time, like I don't really remember much. I remember like a couple times like sitting in the house, my mom hiding in the room because my dad was breaking everything in the house. And that's really all I remember from like my childhood like that. But then getting out to Modesto when my mom left him, I had a stepdad that wasn't really involved much in our life. He was there, but he would more kind of ignore us. And so I started running around right there with a few people. And we'd go back down to the Bay Area, usually like every couple months. And then it got to like once a year. But I didn't really like going down there because my dad was alcoholic. He would drink all the time. And it was just constant fighting with him and my stepmom. And I only really went because I didn't want to see something happen to my sister, my little sister. So down there, my dad was a drug addict. He was alcoholic. I remember going into the house. He'd have a dartboard, open it up, and there'd be a gun sitting in there with a big old bag of dope and lines lined up. And I was a little kid, so I didn't really know what it was. And then it more got to the point where when we'd go down, he wouldn't even be there. It would be like we'd go down and on a Friday and he would be gone the whole weekend partying and basically like show back up when it was time to bring us back. And I don't know, it's just, I knew as a kid it was a bad situation for kids. So I didn't really like going, but my sister being 3 years younger, she knew like that was dad and she wanted to see him. So I would go just because of that. Well, while down there, there was this like hooker that lived in our area or in the apartment complex. And she would kind of like watch out. So when my dad would be out partying, she would, because we'd go outside anyways, even though he was gone. And she more or less like would look out and kind of make sure everything was okay. Because she would see me running around in the apartments. And the apartments was like a majority all black apartment complex, like ghetto apartment. So like around like 12 years old down there, I was already starting to hang around with like the dudes there a little bit. And that's when I got my first gun, because she pretty much seen like what was going on and knew that it was a bad situation for me down there. And with my dad not being there, it was more or less like, here you go. This is so you can protect your little sister and you. So around like that same time, we would be bouncing back and forth from like Oakland, San Leandro, Hayward, out to Modesto and Riverbank. Well, like all my friends at that time were like taggers mostly, but the neighborhood we lived in was the northerner neighborhood. And I didn't really get along with them too much because like basically like I was the youngest one in my neighborhood, but my homeboys were all, in my eyes, pussies. So shit would go down and they would leave the youngest ones to pretty much fend for themselves. So that's when I started carrying like the gun with me around out there. I think I was around like 13, 14. Because I was riding a little BMX bike. And one of my homeboys had got jumped by some northerners. And I was over there. I was like, well, let's go back through there. And my older homeboys didn't want to. And I guess one of the northerners that heard that I was like plotting through one of my homeboys gave me up and was like, oh, yeah, he's plotting on you guys. So they were like, hey, we'll bring him with you, because my homies were already driving and shit. So one of my homeboys was like, "Hey, you want to go to the store with me?" I'm like, "Sure." And he's like, "Well, leave the gun." So I gave it to one of my little homegirls and shit to go with him to the store real fast because it was only a couple blocks from our house. And I hop in the front seat. We go to the store, and he pulls up to a stop sign. When we're pulling up to the stop sign, he like shut the ignition off on me on the car. And like as soon as I seen him reaching to do it, I like looked over like, what the fuck? And when I looked back, my door opened and there were a couple of Northerners. One started choking me out with the seatbelt while the other one was like busting me in my ribs. So afterwards, we went back to his house. I was like, I told my homegirl to give that back to me. I was like, dude, you set me up. And it was some scandalous shit. So I ended up riding my bike back over there and I dumped the whole clip at the front of their house and took off on the bike. Well, when I went to take off, there was a cop coming down the street. So that fool chased me in his cop car and tried to run me over. And we had like a canal behind our house. So I ended up going over the canal and throwing my bike over the fence and went running in the house. And at the time, my aunt, she had worked like loss prevention or something out in Arizona. And I came running in with my bike and ran into my room, started changing clothes and everything because I already knew like the game, like basically like switch your clothes out. That way when cops come flying through the neighborhood. Well, when I did that, my aunt, she stopped me in the house right away. As soon as she see me changing clothes, she was like, "Come here," and started patting me down and they got the gun from me. But they didn't turn me into the cops. So so that kind of like pushed me away because like all my homeboys in my neighborhood started going towards like the northerner route. And I already had like that hate towards them from being set up in the car and shit like that. So we would continue going down to Oakland and some shit had happened where I was abused and it made me like really not want to go down there at all, which is a lot of the reason why I hate dudes that prey on children. And later in life in prison and shit, I would volunteer. I volunteer for the dudes that showed up that had any charges against any kids. And it was kind of like my way to relieve stress or to feel better about the situation. So I ended up joining the skinhead movement when I was in 99. I was just getting ready to turn 20 years old. Well, right before that, because we played like a lot of basketball in my neighborhood, because that's really the only thing we had was like a basketball hoop and a swimming pool for our whole neighborhood. Well, my bigger homeboys, they would go play basketball at different parks against like different neighborhoods and stuff at the time. And a couple of my older homeboys were like, "Hey, you want to go with us over to this park over in Westside Modesto where they play basketball?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "All right, well, don't bring a gun with you." And I'm like, "Man, last time this happened, you guys set me up." So one of my other little homeboys, he had the same name as me, but he was like a year younger. He wanted to go, and then one of my homeboys that just came out the army was in go. So I was like, all right, I felt a little safer about it. So we go over to Westside Modesto to play basketball, and we get there, and it's an all black park, and the whole area is all black. It's the hell park is it? I'll think about it in a minute. But it was all black park, and we get over there and we start to play, and I don't know, I started getting like the bad feeling. So I told my homeboy, "Hey, I'm done." And I told my little homeboy, like, "Hey, just come post up with me." So me and him walk off the court and we go and we post up by my homeboy that just came out the army by his truck. Because we went over there in a little like Nissan mini truck. And my homeboy had a 79 Monte Carlo all hooked up. But all like the big dudes rode in the Monte Carlo and left the three small ones in the mini truck. So he starts posting up with me, and I see the basketball game starting to go bad. Like one of the dudes threw the basketball and hit my homeboy in the back. And my homeboy turns around to say something, and next thing I know, it's like a full out riot on the basketball court. And so me and my homeboy were like we were watching for a minute. We ran over there, and as soon as we ran over, it was like the big dudes broke for the car. And I was like, son of a bitch, like this is the same situation as before with these dudes. So we end up getting back to the mini truck, and my homeboy that was in the Army goes to start it up, and dudes got us at gunpoint on both sides of the car. And he's telling my homeboy, like, hey, give me the radio. And he's like telling him, like, hey, give me the pull-out radio. My homeboy's like, it's not a pull-out. The dude's like, give me the radio. And he's like, nah. And so one of the dudes that grabbed my little homeboy through the window, and he pulled him out and dragged him out into the field, and they started jumping him in the field. And like the little park, there was a church next to it. And luckily, like, church was coming out, and there was a black lady and her husband that came out of church and started yelling, talking about they were then called the police. And so the dude stopped, and we ended up getting in the car, and we went back to Riverbank. So we get back there, and my big homeboys are still gone. So I was like, what the fuck? And I ended up loading up my gun. My little homeboy had a gauge. We ended up loading that up. And then when the bigger homeboy showed up, we told him, like, hey, no, we're going back through there. Like, this shit ain't happening like this. And they didn't want to go. So me and my homeboy, we ended up having my homeboy from the Army drive us out there, and we lit up the whole park because the dudes would be posted out there. We ended up lighting up the whole park. And then when we went back, we kind of like started distancing ourselves from them. And they all ended up going like the northerner route, and that's when I started turning towards more like the white groups. And I met a few dudes like there was Spider, who is the founder of Hardcore out of Modesto, and I started going to jail and shit. So I had met him, and then I met this dude Stitch, and Stitch was like the captain or lieutenant for Hardcore. They were like the two main ones. So I ended up meeting both of them, and they started like teaching me some of the skinhead movement. And after going to back and forth to jail a few times, every time I'd go, I would see both of them in there. And Stitch was basically like the first floor trustee. So he ended up getting me pulled down to where I was first floor trustee with him also. And then that was around like 99, and I ended up joining Hardcore. Well, Hardcore for in Modesto, when it was first like started and I was brought into it in 99, they had like a strong no use policy where we weren't allowed to get high. And it's kind of crazy because like Hardcore is more like a dope fiend fucking movement where they're strongly involved with drug sales and manufacturing drugs, and a lot of the members were using drugs, but it wasn't really like the strong skinhead movement of like down south and stuff like that. Out of Modesto, it was more like gang related, where we were going out and they were doing armed robberies, home invasions, burglaries, shootings, and shit like that. Whereas down south, it's more like hate crime based, from my understanding. Well, so I ended up meeting them, and I had like a little altercation where they found out that I was using, and they came through with one of my homeboys' ladies, and they pulled up and they were like, "Oh, what's up? You using?" I was like, "Nah," but I was, and they knew I was, and we were talking for a few minutes, and then they caught me slipping, like, "Oh, you want to go get high before this meeting?" Because we would have a meeting at the homegirl's house, a couple of houses down from mine, and we would do our meetings there, and everybody would show up, and we'd have our meetings. So they caught me slipping, and I said, "Yeah." So they're like, "All right, well, let's go in." And we go to walk in the house, and they all walk in front of me. And then I go to shut the door. I shut the door. I turned back around, and it was like, pow, first one connected. I ended up waking up on the ground in a puddle of blood. And my homegirl was sitting there like crying and shit. Like, damn, I didn't feel nothing. I was just like, damn, what happened? And they were still sitting there. The homeboy sat down, waited for me to wake up and shit. They said, yeah, you still want to get high? I was like, no, I'm good. I'm good off that. Well, so after that, like, I ended up going back down to Oakland and running around. I'd run around over off like 81st and International, which is basically like a black area too. But I had people in like San Leandro and Hayward, and like the skinhead movement's small down there. They got like, there's a few groups down there like Bash, Bay Area skinheads and shit like that. But it's more like segregated to certain areas, especially down in like Oakland is mostly like, you don't really hear of it too much. And when I joined skinhead, like everybody thinks, oh yeah, they're wearing boots and suspenders and all that. We dressed like gang members, and people would look like, damn, those aren't skinheads. But we were following the skinhead policies. It's just we weren't wearing the boots and shit like that. I had boots, like when I did my robberies, I had on boots, but it wasn't like, unless it was like a meeting and something like that, you couldn't tell the difference between us and like the other gang members running around on the streets. So I ended up running around down in Oakland for a while. I was on the run for some robberies out in San Joaquin County, out of Stockton. And when it was the same day that I got knocked out by my homeboys, that I went down there because my kid's mom that I got 3 kids with, she had said like, hey, the cops were just at our house looking for you, and they went by my mom's house looking for me. And so after I got up, I was still covered in blood and shit, and I went over to my mom's because I knew I couldn't go back to my house. So I went by my mom's, and I was sitting out front like talking to her, and she had my sister and her boyfriend at the time bring me down to Oakland to my dad's, and kind of just like drop me off there because I was wanted by San Joaquin County. So I ended up going down there, and I was running around doing my thing, and I started meeting more like, because my dad was always like around like the biker groups and stuff, and they had built Harleys for him. So he started taking me around to like the little HA bars and shit like that. And I started meeting like a lot of those dudes. And some of them, like one dude, I call my uncle Wicked. We're not really related, but he's HA. He ended up stabbing this dude at a bar for talking to his old lady and catching life. And so I started kind of like hanging around with them a little bit down there on the run. And my uncles had built a Harley for my dad, but they wouldn't let him take it because he didn't have a license. So they're like, hey, if you want to take it, you can. So I started riding that around for like part of the year when I was down there, riding around on his Harley and shit. Because I was like, man, this thing's got power. Plus I can get away from the cops in it if I need to. So I started riding that around down there. I ended up meeting this, my youngest son's mom down there when I was on the run. And I didn't know she was pregnant, nothing like that. I was down there for like a year. I ended up meeting this, my son's mom and shit. And she was going cool. I was working everything. I was working 2 jobs. I was working at this gas station right there next to where we were staying. I would stock like their coolers at night. And then I was doing inventory. We'd go around in like these vans all through the bay, and we'd go do like Home Depot inventory and all that shit, where basically we'd go in with these little machines and we'd count out everything in the store.
Yeah.
That way they knew what their inventory was. And she was going cool, but I was still on the run. So one night my homeboys had called me and they're like, hey, we're then come out there and see you. I'm like, all right. Well, these fools, they came down, and I figured that they would then be here around like 6, 7 o'clock in the evening because they were coming from Modesto. And they come down and 6 and 7 pass. Next, you know, it's like 11 o'clock. And I'm like, man, they're not going to show up. And then it was like 12:30 and my phone rang. And they're like, hey, we're down here. And I'm like, where at? And they're like, hey, we're sitting in the back of this little gas station with the lights out. I'm like, all right. So I go over there and I had on like a white Fila trench coat with a big ass F on the back, hoodie one. And I go walking over there and I don't know, because we were smoking weed down there when I was on the run. And so when I was walking over there, I'm like kind of like not paying attention to what's going on. And I go over to the parking lot and I go to hop in and I'm like, why are you guys parked right here? Like, why are you so late? And they're like, oh, we did some robberies throughout the bay right here. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I hop in and they start up the car and we go to pull out of the parking lot and just lights started popping on everywhere. And the undercovers had been sitting there watching them to see what their next move was going to be. Basically like letting them see if they were going to try to go bust another robbery. And so we go to pull out of the parking lot and all the lights start clicking on. And I'm like, shit. So we pulled into where we were staying and they had us surrounded. They had helicopter out, everything. And they pulled me out of one side of the vehicle and had me lay down. They had my homeboys all lay on the other side. And they're like, one of the undercovers, he was cool. He was like, hey, these 3, they're going for the robberies. This one, I don't know what's up with him yet. And they had us kind of like separate, like me on one side, them on the other. And I'm looking under the truck because my homeboys came in a little blazer. And I'm looking like, what the fuck did you get me into? And they're like, so they ran their names and then they went to run mine. And I gave them a fake name right away. And they're like, they came back again, like, what's your name? And then I hear him ask one of my homeboys, like, hey, what's his name? And one of my homeboys had given him my real name. And so the cop was like, hey, look, these 3 are going for all these Bay Area robberies right now. This one, he's wanted on robbery, so we're going to take him too. And so I ended up going out to San Joaquin County. Well, I went to Santa Rita first. And when I went to Santa Rita, the pod they put me in was an all-black pod. And when I first went into there, I was like, fuck, man, this is going to be all bad. But my girl, well, my ex-girl, my son's mom, she was a blood. She's still a blood. And some shit had happened down there with one of her best friends. And me, her, and her best friend went through and handled some bullshit. And so when I got to Santa Rita, they threw me in this pod. And I went in and I was like, fuck, this ain't be all bad. And like when you walk in to Santa Rita, like you go in and it's like a fish bowl. And they got like these like a tower in the center and then these glass windows. And then all the bunks were like to the left. And then they had like the phones on the right. And they had a vending machine that you could walk up to with like these prepaid cards and basically get like chips, whatever you wanted out of these vending machines anytime you wanted. And they put me in there and I go up to the top bunk and I set my stuff down on my bed and I was like, man, I need to use the bathroom. So I went into the bathroom and this big old black dude comes walking in. And when I got arrested, like my son's mom had already started telling her best friend and all of them that like, hey, the white boy got busted. And so when I hit Santa Rita, she already had people I didn't even know. She already had people like kind of keeping their lookout for me to see where I was in, what pod I was going to end up in. And I got lucky. I landed in the pod that her best friend's dude was in. And so when I got there, it was cool. At first, I thought I was going to be all bad because I went into the bathroom and him and 2 other dudes came in like and started questioning me and shit. I was like, damn, I was ready to fight. And then he ended up telling me like, hey, I'm what's her name's baby dad and shit. And he's like, everything's going to be good as long as you're here. And he ended up giving me a little Walkman and shit like that. And I sat there for a couple of days waiting to be expedited back to San Joaquin County. So when I got expedited back to San Joaquin County, I ran with the whites, and there was only a couple skinheads right there at the time in their county jail. And we were more out at like that it was like a kind of like a little ranch or something, and they had like outside work crews and shit like that. So I went there. I ended up doing like a county year. I pled out and took a county year, and then when I got out, I went back to Modesto and stuff. Well, I went down to the Bay to like try to find my son's mom and shit, and I couldn't locate her. And I guess she had took off out to like Tennessee or something. And I see my son like one time when he was born, like she had called me because they were down here for something, and she called me like, "Hey, you want to see your son?" He was like a month old. So I got to see him for like 5 minutes, change his diaper and stuff, and then she took off, and I was never able to locate her again. So I ended up, our main thing, like the group that I was from, was robberies. So that's what we did. We were involved with guns a lot and robberies. So shortly after that, I'd caught my first prison term for ex-felon with a firearm and grand theft and possession of controlled substance. And people are like, well, how's it ex-felon with a firearm if that's your first time to prison? Well, it's because I did my county year in Stockton for a robbery, and was a convicted felon. So then when I got caught with a gun, it's automatically ex-felon with a firearm. So I ended up catching ex-felon with a firearm. It was like a Friday night out in Modesto, and some shit had happened. And like Modesto on the weekends, they were always really big on cruising, where they would go out cruising up and down McHenry, like from one end to the other. And that was what their thing was. Well, some shit had happened, and I had a little Remington pump, 12-gauge shotgun, and 100 rounds of hollow point slugs sitting on my front seat. And somebody in a truck had looked down and seen it in my car. And when I hit one of the red lights, I went to pull off, and Modesto PD swarmed me and got me boxed in. So I ended up pleading out. I took a 2-year deal for that. Well, when I took the 2-year deal for it, I ended up going to DVI as my reception. And that's where I had met one of the Hells Angels dudes from Modesto, which this dude, Pinky. He owned gangster bail bonds and shit out there at the time. And so I kind of started getting connected with him. And I'd met this dude, this NLR dude. And there was another skinhead from up north. Well, there was a removal that needed to be done on the yard, and Pinky had the yard at the time for the reception. And me and the skinhead, this dude Hellboy, ended up telling him like, "Hey, we'll do this removal for you." And we went out the yard. We ended up catching the dude underneath the gunner tower out on the yard, and me and Hellboy blasted him. Dude was laid out for like 6-7 minutes. They did yard recall and then finally found him laying there. So we ended up skating off on that one. So like by doing that, Pinky was like, he was kind of happy about it. So we ended up going to different prisons, but the NLR dude that I was with, he went to the same prison as me. We ended up going to SADF from Tracy to SADF. And at SADF, that was the only NLR member I ever met. Like people are like, well, NLR runs the prison system for the whites. And I've only met one my entire time in prison. I did 2 years that term, and then I got out. And when I got out, I started fucking with Pinky and them out on the streets because they own gangster bail bonds. And my boy ended up getting out, who was the NLR, and I stayed in contact with him. And it was more or less like shit would happen. Like they would do bonds for people, and if people didn't pay the bonds, he would then have me or the NLR dude go and try to get these dudes. And he didn't care. You didn't have to have your bail bonds license or nothing. It was like gangster bail bonds for a reason. And he was sending dudes after you to get you that were gang members. And he would tell us, like, when you catch the dude, whatever he's got on him, keep it. If he's got pistols in the car, keep them. He didn't care. He's just like, so I ended up doing that 2-year term. And that 2-year term is when I started meeting a lot more skinheads. I met like dudes from Wolfpack, dudes from Sacto Skins that I did a couple removals with. And there was some OCS skins. And there was a couple hardcore there, but they were like Huntington Beach hardcore. And then there was one P9 that showed up. And that at that time, like, because I was in through hardcore, but when I hit prison had me labeled as independent skin because they didn't have no validation stuff on me.
I've heard that term before. I don't know what it means. Like,
so independent skin is like you're brought into the skinhead movement under skinheads that are like recognized skins, but you're not labeled as a certain group. Okay. You're more like you're like a skinhead. Like, say you get brought in from a dude from OCS and one from hardcore, you'd fly more independent because you're not underneath either one of their banners.
Okay.
So with prison, they had told me, like, hey, don't admit to hardcore. You don't have any validation, so stay as independent as long as you can before you get labeled. And I didn't know the reason behind it at the time. I didn't know it was because hardcore was FTB. And they didn't tell me that. It was just, they were like, just stay flying as independent as long as you can before you get labeled. So I started meeting all these dudes from the different banners. And the only thing they really said was like, hey, any yard you get to, make sure that if there's P9 on there, don't let them walk with you guys. And I'm like, okay, like not knowing, because I never even heard of P9 until I hit prison. So we had got, when I was at SADF, a P9 had showed up. And I didn't know no difference at the time. I was like, okay, the dude's a skinhead. And right away, he comes out, we all meet him. Right away, he starts pushing that, hey, it's $100 per inmate that needs to go to the back. And one of my boys who was from Sacto was like, hey, this dude's got to go. We got to move on him. So me, him, and dude from Wolfpack ended up removing him from the yard and went to the hole. And then we came out the hole and we ended up getting into it with somebody else, went right back to the hole. And then I got out and I ended up getting transferred from there to Soledad. But after doing the removal for Pinky at DVI and then removed the removal on the P9 at SADF and then a couple other incidents, when I hit Soledad, because I started off level 2 and then I ended up jacking my points up and I went to Soledad level 3. So when I hit Soledad, I was already tied in with like the skinheads right there. And the dude that had the yard at the time, because Soledad, the 3 yard, what it is it's got 2 blocks. And we basically had like one dude in control of this block, one dude in control of that block. And I landed in the block and ended up being like, my window faced towards the dude that had the yard at the time. And he was a skinhead from Sacto, or not, he was from Smash Team 88 out of Tulare. So he started educating me a lot more on it because like Smash Team, they were really focused on the skinhead movement and educating the skinhead movement. So I ended up more or less getting hooked up with him, and then me and him ended up having the yard together. And then, like, skinheads you can't recruit in prison. The embracement's out on the streets. So people will come in and want to join, and they'll pretty much be like a prospect during that time while they're in. And then once they're out, you'll send them out with like whoever to hook up with, and they could do their embracement out there. So a little youngster came in. He was like 18 years old, just turned 18. And he came in and he landed in my cell. And like my whole time in prison, like the only people we fucked with really was like the Southsiders. We didn't even really fuck with a lot of the whites, which was kind of like weird because we ran with the whites, but like the skinhead politics is so different. Like how the Pisces and the Northerners or the Pisces and the Southerners, that's how we kind of like looked at the whites, was as them being like the Pisces to our race. And because we were like the front line, when shit would crack off, you always knew the skinheads were the ones then go bust the move. So when I'd got to Soledad, this little youngster came in. He was like 18 years old. And he got put in my cell. And right away, I'm like, who do you run with? He's like, well, I'm a Wood, but I was trying to get embraced as a skinhead before I came in. But I got caught up. So his car came over to meet him. And he told him right off the bat, like, look, I'm not running Wood. I'm running skinhead as a prospect. And the dude had like an issue with it a little bit. And so I signed over to my boy that had the yard with me. And my boy's like, there's an issue. We'll just move on him. We'll get the dudes out of here. He's like, dude said, already told him that he's prospect. Like, that's it. He's running with us. And it was just because like in prison, the skinhead group was a lot tighter. Whereas the skinheads all ran one car. It didn't matter which faction you were from or banner you were from. We all ran as one. Whereas like the Woods, they're separated by counties. And each county's got their own dude that they got to answer to. Whereas us, we had to answer to each other, everybody as one. So I ended up doing my time there and paroling out. I got out. I was out like a month. And I got busted with another gun and dope again. I think I was out like 3 weeks or a month. And I got busted again and I went back. And they sent me to Tracy. And when I got to Tracy, as soon as I got there, they'd put me into AdSeg. And I was like, man, what the hell? Because I didn't parole AdSeg. So I got there and they put me as AdSeg. And when they came to do my lockup hearing, they're like, hey, we're transferring you out of here. You got a family member that works here. And I was like, a family member? And then they named off who it was, and it ended up being my stepbrother's wife. And so she had told them that we were family because they had to report whatever. So she had reported that we were family, and they sent me to San Quinn. So when I went to San Quinn, there was a huge skinhead car right there. And the dude that ran the prison was this OG dude, Rocky. He got busted as a minor. He's dead now, so that's the only reason I'm going to say his name. But Rocky had ran that whole prison. And Rocky had got busted at like 17 years old and ran the prison as skinhead. Well, so I was up in the upper yard, and the dude started telling me about Rocky and shit like that. And I was really quick to like voice my opinion in there, which was a bad thing. And they started telling me, and then I started hearing like the stories about him. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that dude's not a skinhead then. because he never got embraced on the streets. That's how I was taught. Like, if you weren't embraced on the streets, you weren't a skinhead. And I had voiced that like a couple times too much, and Rocky started hearing about it. So some shit had happened up there on the yard, and a few of us ended up in the hole. And when I was in the hole is when I met the founder of Valhalla's White Army, and out of Santa Cruz. And in the hole, we had it like front bar, back bar, and we would, for our roll calls and shit like that. Well, I was neighbors to the founder of Valhalla's White Army, and the dude was a youngster, and there was like, it was starting to cause like a big separation in the ad seg, because there was the ad seg we were in, and then like the top back bar of the block behind us was like an ad seg overflow, and there was 9 skinheads on that back bar that were accusing the founder of basically like being a snitch, saying that he gave up information that they had knives in their cells and stuff like that, but there was no paperwork to back it. And I've always been like really strong on like, if you didn't make an accusation like that, there needs to be paperwork to back it before we move on our own. Like, we're not going off of somebody's just word on it, because it could be a smut campaign or whatever else. You got to have some sort of paperwork. And so it started causing kind of like a little divide in the ad seg right there. But I think the whole reason why it was doing that is because the kid's dad was Brand, and he was over there on death row. So it's like every time we would try to do anything, he would shoot word to his dad through one of the lieutenants of the prison, and the cops there they'll carry your kites for you. They'll come to your cell like, hey, here, boom, slide it in the bars. Like, if you got a response going back, I'll come back through right before shift change, pick it up, and I'll go drop it off. They said the only thing we won't carry is weapons or drugs. They'd pass tobacco, everything else. So he would hear that they might be getting ready to move on him. He would shoot word to his dad. His dad would shoot back shutdown orders like, nope. So there was kind of like that divide going on at the time. And what he was doing with Valhalla's White Army was basically like the same thing USAS is doing, where he was trying to pull all the little factions or banners and put them underneath one, which is what USAS has been doing. Is they were pretty much at the time when USAS, from my knowledge of starting, like when it came to California from Oregon, it was more just bringing all banners underneath the one instead of all being separated and running just the USAS banner. And at the time, like, I had met dudes out in like Tuolumne County and stuff like that were USAS, and they were trying to get us to go underneath their banner. But our founder was like, nah. He's like, I worked too hard getting hardcore from Huntington Beach, because hardcore originated out of Huntington Beach, and then it slowly went up to like Huntington Beach hardcore to Modesto hardcore, up to Yuba hardcore and stuff like that. He's like, I put in too much work to just give it up to fall under one of these other banners. And Valhalla's White Army was doing that, and he was pushing it hard. Well, I was voicing like to him about Rocky, and from like them calling him a snitch and shit like that, now after sitting back like years and thinking about shit, I'm like, he probably was, because he was the main one I was voicing to, and then all of a sudden Rocky had a handful of my kites that were addressed to this dude and shit like that.
Yeah.
And so it was crazy, because I had like a 9-month shoot to do, and this is how much pull some of these dudes got. Some of these dudes got in these other prisons. Is I had a 9-month shoot to do for removal in at San Quinn, and Rocky had me fucking pulled. Like I went to my classification hearing. They suspended my shoe. He had me pulled from ATSEG right then, straight down to the lower yard and in a kitchen job that same night.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the fuck? And they pulled me, brought me down there, and I get down to the lower yard, and one of the cops is like, hey, you got work. You're going to work in the kitchen right now. And they brought me there, and they bring me into the kitchen. And at San Quentin, like the kitchen, they got like real butcher knives and shit because they got the meat cutting and all that shit, and with like this little thin chain going to the table. And so they brought me down there, and they're like, hey, come on, you're going to work. And they brought me to work, and when the cop was walking me, he's like, hey, do you know Rocky? I'm like, no. I said, I've heard of him. He's like, you don't know him? I said, no. He's like, well, you're going to meet him right now. You're going to work with him. And so they brought me up there, and they put me in this little room with them. And he's like, I was still young. I was like maybe like 23 at the time. And he was like, oh, you're the kid that's been speaking on me, huh? And I was like,
man.
I'm like, man, yeah. And he's like, here, I'm going to explain my story to you so that you can understand it. And he gave me, and he's like, do you still think that I'm not a skinhead? He's like, I got busted when I was 17. I never had the chance to join, but I've followed everything since then. And they made an exception to do the recruit for him in prison because he was never getting out. And I was like, nah, I agree. He's like, all right, well, here you go. You're working in here with me every day until you leave here. You then do this essay, 1,488 words. It better end correctly, not just drop off at the end of a sentence. And you then explain to me why you should still be allowed to be a skinhead. He's like, and then you got your regular DPs that you then do when you hit the yard. I was like, damn. And it was like a month of DPs every single day. I'd go to work, and here you go. Did you write that essay? Yeah. Okay, here's one that you're writing now today. And he started pushing harder on me to, like, education wise, because he was like, a lot of these dudes were like wasting their time in here. So he was strong on like essays. He was more loose on like hands-on removing his own. He wanted you to be able to write essays and shit like that. And so I ended up leaving from there, and I went to Jamestown to their 3 yard. And when I got to Jamestown, there was a good skinhead car there. And we would do our church once a week, where we'd go over there, we'd have our meeting and see if there was any issues on the yard and shit like that. And the dudes at Jamestown, they had like a binder, and they were strong on writing essays too. And so they had papers that dudes had wrote 5, 6, 7 years ago still in this binder. And so like the dudes that would show up, it was required that everybody write like one essay. Oh, like it would rotate, like they want you to do it like once a month, just to kind of see where your head was at. And it would give us something like we'd write it, and then we'd have to read it off at church. And then the other skinheads could more or less like run questions off of it and stuff just like that to see if anybody disagreed with parts. And it was just something kind of to look forward to see where everybody's head was at. And the whole time there, like there was no incidents. There was nothing that nobody had to be removed. I think I only seen like one fight there the whole time there. After the whole yard, it was like a smooth running yard. So I ended up rolling from there. And that was my second term. And then I got out, and it was like 3 weeks, and I got busted with a gun and dope again. And I went back. So when I went back, they brought me to Tracy and then put me straight on a bus to San Quentin again because of my stepbrother's wife. And so when I was there, Rocky got me, as soon as he heard I got off the bus, he had me pulled straight back down there again and put me in the kitchen. And then he started bringing me, because like the kitchen dudes, the way it works is they have like the upper yard for like reception, and then they had like the like the lifers, because there's that prison got a lot of lifers on it, and they had their chow hall. There was like 4 different chow halls, and so he had me working in with him for a while, and then he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna get you transferred over to this chow hall with where all the lifers go through," and then he had me moved over there so that I could start meeting a bunch of those dudes, and it was cool. I ended up going from there, and I went to Stat F again, and then it was like Stat F. We got in some incidents, and I ran into the same NLR dude, and he had his hair all grown out and everything. He was like, "Hey, don't let nobody know I'm NLR because I don't want to get snatched off the yard." And out of 3 prison terms, that was the only one I ever encountered. So I ended up getting caught up in some bullshit there. And what happened? I ended up bouncing around to a few different prisons, and then I paroled. And then when I was out, I went up to Tuolumne County, and I started like kind of functioning with the USAS stuff out of that county. And it was cool. Like the cops were kind of like watching their compound because they had a compound out there. And I don't remember what happened. That's when I first started like hearing about like sharps and shit like that. And they started telling me like, "Oh yeah, we got some sharps in our county." And I was like, "Okay," I didn't even know what the hell they were. And they started telling me. And then, so I would go up there and I'd be around them for a while. And then I'd come back to Merced. And there was a white northerner here in Merced that used to run dope up there to Tuolumne County. And he would drop it off to these dudes. And it ended up being one of the dudes that was a sharp. And so me and this female I was with and her brother, we were in my car, and we went out to the lake, and then we were going up to my boy's compound, and I went and did it with my boy that was a white northerner a few times to do these drops. So I kind of caught the routine of what they were doing. And when we were going to my boy's compound, I seen the dude that we were doing the drops to. And I'm like, okay, the only time these dudes are walking is when they got either the dope on them, the money on them, or something. So I pulled up and I stripped them right there on the spot. And it took them like 6.5 hours to dial 911 before they finally reported it. So I ended up stripping them. When I did it, the female's brother that was in the back seat, he jumped out with me, and he was hardcore also. And so he jumps out because one of the dudes had dropped a gun behind him, and I didn't see him drop the gun. So he jumped out of the back seat to grab it. And we ended up taking their boots, everything with us, and left them standing there. And we went to the compound right there in Tuolumne in Jamestown and burned like all the sharp material, like all their sharp shit. We burned it. And one of the dudes from USAS had kept like a pair of the boots for like a shrine or some weird shit. And so the task force started looking for me out in Tuolumne County. They started hitting like all the known skinhead groups because the sharps that knew in the report, it said like that I had a bad attitude. They could tell I was fresh out of prison, and I didn't have a shirt on. So they ID'd like tattoos from like my waist up to my chest. He couldn't ID my face, but like certain tattoos that I had on me that are covered up now. But they ID'd me by that. So they started hitting all like the known USAS spots in Tuolumne County. And then when they were doing it, they ended up recovering the boots from the victims from one of the dude's spots. And then when they did that is when they found out that I was from hardcore. And they started hitting hardcore spots around Modesto and Merced. And Merced didn't even have hardcore. Like that was my main goal, was when I joined Modesto hardcore and they heard that I was like out of Merced, they wanted to branch a chapter out to Merced and start Merced hardcore. And so I, like, the whole time I always stayed in good contact with the founder and with Stitch. And so I ended up going to county jail. When they ended up catching me for these robberies out in Tuolumne, I ended up going to the county jail there. And as soon as I hit the county jail, they threw me in like their AdSeg for high profile. And they labeled me as Modesto Hardcore. And so the whole time there, they would document any like communications I had with dudes that weren't in the AdSeg. And they got all their information to be able to have CDC validate me as hardcore. So when I ended up taking my deal in Tuolumne, they had brought me to DVI and threw me in the AdSeg there because I was coming from AdSeg in Tuolumne County. And then DVI shipped me straight to San Quinn. And as soon as I hit San Quinn in reception, they hit me with they like brought me into the R&R and they put me in a stand-up cage and they smacked me with a validation packet. Had me documented as hardcore. And I was like, damn. And it, like, from everything that they had, like, they had me on it. And they had like the communications, they had everything, the gang robbery. And when they hit me with the packet, they said that I could no longer program safely within the GP prison system as being an FTB member for hardcore. And I was like, what the? I didn't even know what that was still, like, because my homeboys didn't tell me. They were like, oh, yeah, we're FTB. Okay, so they hit me my packet and they're like, and at San Quinn, they hit me my packet, my validation, everything. And they said, look, we're going to kick you out to the SNY. And I was like, fuck. So I ended up getting kicked out to the SNY there. And then they brought me from there and they shot me back to the level 4 at SADF. And when I got there, then I see our founder there on the yard. I see the other dude, our other dude on the yard, and the whole yard's all USAS. So like my first 3 terms, I never ran into USAS really on any of the prison yards. It'd be like Smash Team 88, all these other groups, but there was never any USAS there. And that's when I started learning more about the FTB. And USAS is FTB, so they can't push the line. So they administration automatically forces all FTB groups SMY. And that's where I was trying to explain to people, like, the difference is with skinheads, it doesn't matter if you're SMY or GP, because the skinheads don't run off of brand politics. And USA's big recruitment is SMY, and they're the biggest skinhead group in California. And that's where it makes the difference, is like the difference with the skinhead politics and like northerner and southerner politics. And people,
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, man.
And people didn't understand. They're like, oh, SMY, you're automatically no bad. You're all bad. No, it doesn't work that way with different politics. That's the way that your guys' politics worked, not the politics for everybody else. Because there's a lot of dudes, everybody over there, they're still checking the paperwork. They're still doing this. It's not that they got bad paperwork, it's the administration forced them because they're FTB members.
So with that whole movement, right, the FTB, what groups? I heard the Wolfpack, USAS, a couple others. What was all those groups that came together and they were forced over to the other side? Because, you know, people say, oh, you have a choice and all that, and it doesn't sound like it.
No, you don't. Once the administration is involved, you have no choice no more. Like they're forcing you, regardless of what you want. Yeah, you got a choice. You could either go over there or you could sit in this shoe, but eventually they're gonna kick you out anyways. And so, like the big ones that I know was like hardcore. Well, USAS is the biggest one because they're doing their recruitment now still on the SNY. Whereas like a lot of skinhead groups you can't recruit in prison, they're doing their recruitment there. And that's because their main two founders for USAS is right there at SADF. But you got hardcore, you have a lot of Sacto, Wolf Pack, Valhalla's White Army. There's a lot of different little groups that have all gone FTB and are now falling underneath the USAS banner.
Okay. The with that's a crazy dynamic, man. The founder of the Valhalla from Santa Cruz, his old man was
his dad, AB.
Yeah. And he's having issues. He's saying forget those guys, but he's going to him when he's got issues.
Yeah.
I guess son going to father, that's probably more of the dynamic than a gang thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's crazy. And that's definitely different. And Brothers by Choice is over there.
Yeah, they have Brothers by Choice over there. Their founders testified on groups. I think I did a story a while back. I might have deleted it out. But yeah, their founder is out of Modesto. He had testified on his group and then started up that Brothers by Choice more as a protection afterwards.
And then it was basically the taxing that you guys didn't like, or the constant iron hand, you're going to follow these rules. Is that what caused you guys to rebel?
A lot of it was the taxing, because you were required $100 per white inmate on that yard, and if that inmate didn't have people supporting him, somebody's having to cover that money on that yard. And a lot of the FTB groups were like, these dudes been sitting in the back this long. Why are we listening to anything that they're saying? We're out here putting in all the work and they're not doing shit but sitting in the back there taxing us.
And was this around the time they were getting kicked out of the SHU? Is that why the administration was so like adamant, you guys, we don't want a big giant, every prison to go up?
I started noticing more around like 2005, 2007. Because they just recently started getting kicked out of the SHU when they started like doing that peace treaty and letting everybody out.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of curious, because that would have been one hell of a dynamic. That would have been
when I got forced over was 2000. Well, I did 12 years straight on that one, so 2007.
Okay.
When I got hit with the validation and moved over.
Yeah, I can see you're gonna go sit in Corcoran, or you guys can go to this yard and continue what you're doing, and then it gets rid of the problem.
Well, and for us, it's a bad situation, because once you get smacked with that validation and you're FTB, the last place you want to go is go get slammed over at one of the SHUs where they're all at.
Yeah.
Because you'd still be fighting the GP part, and you're being thrown in cell with them too. And that's what had happened to some of the USAS when they were doing the first slamming them over. Was there was a couple of dudes that were like no, and they'd get shipped over to the SHU and end up getting blasted by their cellies. And then finally administration was like, we're not doing this no more because you guys keep saying that you're not SNY, but we're putting you in with GP cellies and your cellies are blasting you.
Yeah, that's a hard position to be in with all that. But it's like there is a major difference. Excuse me. The like you said, the founder of Brothers by Choice testified. You guys were forced over there. You're still checking paperwork. You're still living by, your own rules. So, when people come and say, oh, you're SNY, there's a difference. There's definitely, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, because just because they're on the yard, dudes are still checking paperwork. You're still checking paperwork for who you fuck with. You're still checking the paperwork on who's coming in your cell. And the whole yard knows who's fucked up and who's not. And they're not accepted over within anything. So it's not like people are like, oh, you guys are sitting there and people are programming with these chomos and shit like that. Hell no, these dudes are pushing and removing the chomos from the yard. That's what caused all this that's going on now with these non-designated yards and the integration, is because all these dudes are removing the chomos and dudes like that, which forced CDC to have no safe place for these dudes to be. That was what SNY was originally designed for, was for the protection of the inmates that couldn't be on the GP yard. And then administration started forcing FTB groups like that over there, and dudes that were getting removed from, like, Northerners and Southerners that are being removed for bogus calls, started setting up these groups and checking paperwork on their members. And now you end up with all these dudes that have been deemed no good for bad calls or because they didn't want to listen to somebody, but their paperwork's still good. And now you got them part of these groups, and now they're victimizing these same dudes that went there for protection. And now administration forced that non-designated yards where they're integrating everybody back together now.
So we're okay. So you get to SMI. We'll continue your story because when did you got out?
I got out It's been 5 years now.
Okay, so you were there when they started the integration or 50-50 and okay, so we'll get to that. So you okay, so boom, you get validated and then they force you to SNY, but you're not a snitch, you're not a sex fan, you're nothing foul.
No.
So you just don't want to pay taxes. So what happens on the SNY while you're there?
The SNY, there was a lot of shit going on, but a lot of it was the skinheads would kind of kick it and do their thing. And they had a few like whites from like Sacramento and a few other dudes that like they would check their paperwork. And if you were then be at the workout bars or anything like that or selled up with anybody, everybody's paperwork was being checked. And they were more or less letting like the 2-5ers and the Northern Riders clean house. So it was like, why are we then waste manpower when we got these other dudes that are willing to do it and wanting to do it? So there was a lot of incidents like that. And that's how I met a lot of these dudes that I've done stories on, is because I've been on both sides. So I've always kept it respectful with everybody, and that's how I met like Phantom from Bulldogs and Crackers and shit like that. Okay. And I was on the yard with them, so they were always respectful. We did business together, and so it's like everybody that does doing business, like you know who's good on that yard and who's not, and you could tell because the dudes aren't fucking with them. Like nobody from any of the skinhead groups or even like those SNY groups, they're not going to fuck with somebody that's paperwork's no good. And you can see it out on the yard. A lot of those dudes won't even go out the yard. Okay. Because when they come out the yard, they end up getting victimized anyways. So it's not like you got a whole bunch of trash running around on the yard just kicking it. It's not like that.
Okay. And then, so you're at SAT-F?
Yeah. I was at the level 4.
Okay. So what, your first level 4 yard?
Yeah, that was my first level 4.
So what was that like compared to a 3-2 for you? Was there adjustments? Was you're like, okay, I'm up here with the hitters now, and
yeah, like the level 3 when I pro level 3 and stuff, and then going to ad segs, like they had the SAT-F, the level 4 SMY, and then they had the mainline SMY right there, the GP still, and 90% of the time that prison is going down for alarms, it was the SMY yard putting it down. So it people think like people are just over there kicking it in flip flops and shit like that, and those dudes are laying down the yard almost every single day.
that's what I've heard. I heard they're really
it's more dangerous over there than it is on the GP yard.
And it's like the Wild West. They don't. I mean, you skinheads. So what's the politics like if you find out a dude's foul and like say you're going to take it upon yourself to remove him? Can you just go do it, or do you got to be like, hey, everyone, check it out? What do you think?
No, you still got to let everybody know.
Okay.
And it's the same policies as like the rest of the yards. Like level 4s, it's weapons only. You're not doing hands-on. We weren't allowed to go hands-on. So it was, if you're going to do something, it better be something that's worth it because you're catching a case.
And so you're on the level 4 and you're over there at SAT-F. What are you there for the rest of your term?
No, I was at SAT-F, and then I kicked off a couple riots.
Can you share one of those stories?
So I was at SAT-F, and somebody had showed up, and he was in a different block, and the blacks in there were like started trying to like kind of bully him or punk him, and they didn't know who he was. And so he came out the yard and he was telling us, and we were walking the yard, and it was me, him, and another dude. And we get by the basketball court because the blacks would all hang out on the basketball court. And we're walking by the basketball court, and dude was like, "Hey, what's up? Is that one?" I'm like, fuck it, let's go. And we had already told, because we had already told everybody like, hey, this dude's been getting kind of like punked. Not punked, but like pretty much punked. And they're like, all right, well, whenever you guys are ready. So the 3 of us went by there, and it was a basketball court. And the 3 of us ended up rushing at the basketball court. And 2 of us, we were like kind of like back to back fighting because the whole basketball court rushed us, which was funny because when you got more than 2 or 3 dudes on you, they're hitting themselves more than they are you. And the cops right there, they were letting us fight. So we kicked it off, and then everybody from the rushed across the yard and came rushing the basketball court too. And then we ended up getting in the stand-up cages on the yard because we kicked it off in the morning. And then when we were in the stand-up cages, they started to run the next yard, and the yard went down again.
Oh, shit. Yeah. You really did kick a big one off, man.
So when I was in the hole, that was the second one. When I was in the hole, they kept the yard slammed for like a month. And then after that month, they came out and they kicked it off one more time. And then they're like, you guys are getting out of here. And they transferred me and 2 of my co-defendants out of there. And they sent us to Old Corcoran across the street. And we were there for a minute, and we got into some shit at Old Corcoran, and they shot us up to High Desert.
Oh, no. Oh.
And so we got up to High Desert, and it was funny because like me and 2 of my co-defendants, one was a lifer and one was short like me. And so they're like, the one that was lifer, he's like, use a weapon, I'll take the blame on it. I'm like, all right. So that's what we did. And administration was like, oh, you guys are starting too much shit here. We're going to send you send you 3 to here now. I was like, why aren't you splitting us up? You're shipping us around, letting us fuck shit up, and then
Yeah.
then finally, I went to Salinas Valley, and some shit cracked off there, and then I shot back up to High Desert again. And then I went from High Desert, and when I got to High Desert, administration was like, no, you're not staying here.
Oh.
And then they shot me back down to Old Corcoran. And when I got to Old Corcoran, me and my 2 co-defendants, it was like every time they ship us, they ship all 3 of us. And they put us on one of the vans instead of the big bus, and they'd special transport us. And they would get us, we went back down to Old Corcoran, and we get there, and there was a Southsider that had owed like $1,500 and was trying to dodge from paying it. And we had already had the orders, because when we went to Corcoran the first time, that was our target, was like, hey, this dude owes money, get him. And we got there, and we ended up getting shipped out before we could catch the dude. So when we went back the second time, one of my co-defendants, he was in another block, and he's out of yard. He tells me like, hey, I seen the dude that owes the money. I said, all right. So every morning for like 3 or 4 mornings, we try to catch him in the chow hall, like the chow line. And then we finally saw him in the chow hall, and we got on him and caught the attempted murder right there, and went to the hole for attempted murder. I was like a year to the house. So I went to the hole for attempted murder, and they didn't recover the weapon. It was funny because we were in the chow hall, and the bombs start going off, and I threw the weapon over towards the blacks, like, fuck it, here. It's your guys' problem. And when I looked over to prone out, there was this black dude with a big old afro, and it was just solid white from the pepper bombs and shit. And so I went to the hole for attempted murder, and then I sat in the hole like 3 months was all they kept us back there for attempted murder. And then they kick us out the hole, and I was in handcuffs, and they were bringing me back to my block. And there was a white boy that was a piece of shit, and he wouldn't come out the cell, so they couldn't get him off the yard. And they're bringing me to my block, and the cops cool. He was escorting me in handcuffs. He was carrying my shit. And we get into the block, and they bring me up to the door, and the cop sets down my property. And I like looked in, and I seen who it was, and I was like, oh man, fuck no. And the cop's like, he was cool. He's like, hey, do what you got to do. It's good. I'm like, what? He's like, just do what you got to do. It's good. And so he uncuffed me, put me in the cell, and he yelled up to the tower, and the tower popped one of my boys' cells. My boy came running down, handed me a knife and some razors, and I caught my second attempted murder. And the cop stood there the whole time. He's standing there watching in the window. And then finally he's like, hey, go ahead and stop. Dude's dead. And so he cuffed me up. He had me slide in the knife and the razors, and he slid him into the cell next to us and was like, told the dudes, hey, get rid of that. And he cuffed me up, and he put me in the shower. And he's like, when I hit my alarm, you then have about 40 seconds before the gang unit comes running in here. And he put me in the shower, and he let me wash off. And he told the people next to the shower, hey, give me some clean clothes for him. And I showered, and I had missed some blood that was smeared on my arm that I didn't see. And he let me shower. And then as soon as I was done, and I put the clean clothes on, he's like, you good? I said, yeah. And he hit the alarm. Boom. The whole time, dude was laid out in the cell.
Fuck, dude. What was going through your mind? You just got out from.
I was still fighting the attempted murder. I hadn't even started going to court yet on it.
Fuck. Do you think it was a setup at first when he was like, "Go ahead, do it"?
Yeah, I was like, man, okay, I'm gonna take your word on it. I hope so.
Fuck, man,
and
that's a roll of the dice.
So they get to the shower, and the gang unit shows up, and he starts taking pictures of me, and he's like, he's seen the smeared blood, and he was like, oh, we got you. But the cop that had cuffed me up and put me in the shower that brought me from AdSeg, he stayed like right there the whole time until I had to go back to AdSeg. And then when he escorted me back to the hole, because I just came out the hole, wasn't even out the hole a few minutes, and was going right back to the hole. And he told me, he's like, don't worry, it's good. I'm like, man, I hope so. I'm supposed to go home in like 9 months. And he's like, nah, trust me, it's good. And so when I started going to court, my co-defendant pled. We pled out because they wanted my co-defendant to take a deal, and because they in the report, the whole report was fucked up. So all three of us had paid lawyers, and that was for the Chow Hall incident. And so my lawyer was basically using the story like, 'cause one of the cops said that I tried to rush the cops so that my co-defendants could stay on dude longer. And then one of the cops said that he didn't even see me involved in the incident, where I was the one that started the incident. And so the main one they seen was one of my co-defendants. So he's like, shit, I'm doing life anyways. I'll plead out, just drop charges on them. So they ended up dropping the charges because they knew they had me on that second attempted murder. And so when I started court for that one, I was going in and out from ADSEG to court, and then it came time for me to parole. So I ended up paroling to Kings County Jail to still fight this attempted murder, and I just finished doing the 12 years. And I'm like, man, this shit sucks. So I get to there, and I start going to court, and then they brought in the cops to testify on what happened. And the only cop that could testify was the one that was standing there that uncuffed me. And he came into court and he said that he's seen dudes stabbing and slicing himself 28 times. And the DA's like, there's no way he did that because there was puncture marks all over. And then the dude had a big slice down his spine. And he's like, there's no way it's possible. And the cop said, I'm telling you, I watched him do it to himself. And the victim, he said, I just want off this yard. I don't want no problems. And the DA wanted to argue. The judge was like, look, cops already gave his testimony. I'm dismissing this case. Charges were dropped. An hour later, they walked me out of court. An hour later, they had me out the front doors to come back home.
So was this guy like a child molester?
He was all bad. Child molester.
Okay, now it makes a lot more sense. Okay.
And what's crazy is like the cops will let you do that shit when they know it's somebody that's fucked up like that.
Yeah,
they're letting you do it,
dude. Yeah, those guys don't even. I don't even think we should waste our time on them. Just put them down and move on. But let's rewind real quick. High Desert. Everyone hears the myths. Everyone hears, that's rock and roll. It's the lighthouse. When you were doing your time there, was it on and cracking or?
Yeah, it was, but I think honestly, old Corcoran and new Corcoran was cracking more than High Desert.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's and then up there, you hear the rumors about all the cops. They sympathize for the whites and they're racist and all that. Is that true, or is that just like a?
No, they do. They sympathize more for the whites, and because that's a lot of the cops up there are white. But I don't know. I think it has more to do with like how different inmates are like respectful towards the cops is more what they favor.
That makes sense. And what years were you in High Desert?
I was in High Desert. I got out in 19, so 2017.
2017 to 2019?
No, 2017. I was there, and then I was only there for a short time, and then I left, and then I went back.
Okay. Because I was wondering, 2017, I think it was 2018, the Pat Brady hit where he took out the him and his prospect took. So I was wondering if you were there for that, but it was yeah. And then so going back to the integrated and 50-50 yards, what were you like forced onto one of those yards?
No, and the last time that I really heard of a 50-50 was like 05, 07 when Jamestown had a 50-50 yard, and then they kind of like went away from them. And then they started doing the planning or whatever for these non-designated yards. And the non-designated yards were just started to be implemented in like, what, 2019?
Okay.
Around there.
So
And
you got
started integrating the level 1s and 2s, and now they're doing the 3s and 4s.
So you got lucky to miss that.
Yeah, I got lucky on that one.
Yeah. And so I'm sure you've talked to friends who are on those, like, because people talk about them, but they really don't have any firsthand knowledge, like from people who are there or like actually there themselves. So
yeah,
like,
they started doing the 1s and 2s, and I guess like a lot of the 1s and 2s, the dudes weren't really pushing the issue too much. But now they're starting to do the 3s and 4s, and I know I've talked to a few people, and they were like, "This is gonna be ugly," because they're not they sit and wait to be victims, and they know the policies of the GP, and just because administration's forcing it doesn't mean it's going to be something that's allowed by the inmate. The brand's not going to lose their manpower and shit like that by allowing dudes to go to these non-designated yards and program. And so, like, the people that I've talked to had already said, like, we're not even giving them the chance to get in the cell. Like, if they're coming to our yard, it's going to be ugly for them. Just like if we were to go to their yard, it's going to be ugly for us, because they're like, I had a couple boys that were like, oh, I'm going to let them in the cell and wait for them to close the door and then get on them. But I've talked to a few others, and they're like, we don't even care. Like, once that door opens, if we know where they're coming from, we're going to get on them right then.
Damn, dude. That's stressful. That's on both sides.
Yeah.
That's some stress. I'm glad you didn't have to go through that.
And it's even worse, like, when you're showing up to somebody else's yard, because they already got their weapons and all that shit there. So you're going to get the shit end of the stick when you're showing up to another yard.
Man, that's a horrible situation to be in for anyone. So you shipped down to Salinas Valley. What was that yard like? Because again, you hear about Salinas Valley, New Folsom, High Desert, Pelican Bay, Corcoran.
Well, Salinas Valley, that's how I met that fool monster.
Oh, okay.
From Ventura.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I did the story on him, like, basically, like, because I know the dude firsthand. And that's why I said he's like an opportunist killer, because he's not somebody that's saying do it heads up.
He's the one who got the guy who was handcuffed to the table, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
He came into a little bullshit term and caught 2 life sentences now. And the dude's not like that. He's not somebody that ain't go heads up with you. It's if you don't see it coming, yeah, he's a killer, but he's an opportunist killer. He's not somebody that's saying go heads up with somebody that he knows can be a threat to him. That's why he does it in handcuffs and shit like that.
Damn, dude. Yeah, that guy, man, that was. Imagine sitting there, bro, and just like looking up, like the look on his face was like, fuck. Like he accepted it, man. He wasn't like, he was like, here we go.
Yeah,
that was crazy, dude. So and then so you walk out of Kings County Jail, and you're free. Can you continue from there?
All right. So when I was in court and they dropped the charges, they brought me back to my cell and was like, the gang unit right there, those gang officers were ready to get me out of there, because one of my co-defendants, he paroled too. So they had us both in Kings County. And while we're in there, at first we were like, man, we'll just fuck shit up here. And so my co-defendant we were capping our doors and trying to get people. And my co-defendant ended up whacking somebody there. But when they dropped the charges, the gang unit officers were bringing me back to the cell, and they're like, because my mom and my sister were at court. They show up to my court dates and shit. And the gang unit was like, hey, look, when you get back there, get your stuff ready right now. We're letting you go right now. And so they brought me back, and they're like, we already talked to your mom and your sister and stuff, and they're going to be here waiting for you. And so they brought me back and had me grab my stuff and when it started processing me out. And I don't know, it was just weird, like, because I was already like set, like, damn, I already done fucked my life up over this shit now. Because I went in to do 12 years and caught 2 attempted murders a year to the house. And they were trying to give me 26 years on one and 25 on the other. And so when they dropped the charges and shit and brought me out, like I went out and my mom was there and my sister was there to take me back home and shit. But like driving home, I don't know, it was just weird, like seeing everything, because in 12 years, a lot of shit changes. And just being out and like, it didn't really seem like real. And so we ended up coming back to Merced, and the first night I stayed at my sister's house because like through all my time of being locked up and shit like that, I'd go to my mom's and cops be running up on her house and shit like that. And with her getting older and shit now, like I didn't want to put my family through that shit no more. But I knew like after fighting the 2 attempted murders, I was going to do whatever I could to stay out. And prior to me leaving SAT-F is when I had told the founder and the lieutenant that I said, I'm cool. Kind of then move on. I'm not feeling it no more. And a lot of that had to do with my my nephew's half black. So all my times of bouncing around after I left SAT-F is when I started covering up tattoos. Just because I didn't want to have to like explain stuff to my nephew or my family and shit like that. And so when we came to Merced. We stopped and ate on the way and got like Starbucks and shit. And I ended up like feeling like sick from like
all the sugar.
Yeah, eating everything on the way home. And we went to my sister's, and I already knew wasn't then try to stay with family. So I went and got into a program here in Merced, which was like a men's sober living home. And so I got into the program the next day, and the 4th day out, because my sister helped me do like resumes and shit like that, even though I didn't have like any job history or anything like that. She had made resumes for me and put like her and my brother-in-law and stuff as like people to contact. And instead of listing like job history and stuff, she basically like put stuff like that I was good at and shit like that, and helped me build like a little resume. And it worked. It got me employed. So 4th day out, I got hired on at Sensient, where I met my lady. And my mom or my sister would come and like pick me up to take me to work. And then after like 4 days of that, my sister was like, hey, look, you're already doing good. You're not relying on family and shit like that. And her and my brother-in-law gave me a truck, Tahoe. That way I could get back and forth to work and not have to rely on people.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed at that program. I met my lady the 5th day out. And then I stayed at that program while I was working and saving up money, and then I ended up moving into like I'd get off work and I'd go see my lady when we first started talking, and then I ended up moving into the apartment complex she was at. So I had like my little apartment, and then she had hers, and then I ended up moving to hers with her and saving up money, and then I don't remember what happened. I was talking to her, and I was like, because she knew I had my kids and stuff, but like I wasted my kids' whole lives doing time and didn't really know them. Like I'd get pictures of them. I'd come out of prison, see them maybe 1 or 2 times, and be back to prison. And so like I started telling her like that I wanted to have a kid, but one that I'm actually there for this time. And so when she finally agreed to have my daughter that we have now, I promised like my daughter and stuff that I wouldn't go back. That way I could be there with her.
Yeah.
But now I do now I make sure to do everything I can to stay out for her and for my lady and my stepkids and stuff like that.
That's good, man. Because I've noticed a common denominator in a lot of these stories, and it's the lack of a father.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the best things that ever happened to me was being sent to live with my dad. And I don't know where I'd be, but I've noticed it's a common denominator, unfortunately. But you're doing the right thing, bro. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for getting clean. I'm proud of you for staying out 5 years. I'm proud of you for being there for your daughter, man.
Oh yeah. And what's crazy is my son whose mom was a blood.
Mm-hmm.
I only seen one time when he was a month old. Since we've been out like this last year, because I've tried looking him up and stuff before when I would have my cell phone in prison and stuff like that, and I can never locate him. And I try searching for him or his mom or whatever, and I could never find him. And about a year ago, because he ended up becoming a blood out there in Tennessee, and he caught up on some Fed cases. And so when he got kicked out the feds, they sent him out to Modesto with his grandma, and he had did one of those like ancestry DNA testing. And when he got the results back, it had my cousin listed as a positive match for the DNA. And then it had like contact info for her. So he ended up contacting her and then got in contact with us. And then like he called, or he had left a message with my cousin and then my sister. And then I ended up getting his number, and me and my lady had called him like as soon as we got the phone number. And then we called him and talked to him probably like a half hour, and then we turned and drove out there and met him. And then like, cause he's 22 now. So it was like kind of rough for him with his grandma and stuff. So he ended up coming out here with us, but he had to turn himself in to do 6 months. So he's been out here with us, and then he just turned himself in a few days ago.
Oh shit! Is he? Is it like looking at years or just like another?
No, it was 6 months.
Okay.
Like he could have did it in a program, but he didn't want to. Like me, young, doesn't want to listen to people, and I tried giving him the best advice I could the whole time. And so did like my friends around right here, because I only talked to a few people. I got like one buddy that's I've known like 19 years that lives 2 houses over. And then like my cousin that comes out from the Bay Area every other week. And we all tried talking to him, but he was hard-headed and young and didn't want to do a program. So now he's doing the little 6 months. But yeah, he had to turn himself in. And he's up in the federal jail or whatever up in like Calusa, somewhere up north.
Oh, what was that?
I think he's in the federal jail up in like Calusa, somewhere up north.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure of that one. I'm just glad I didn't send him Atwater or something. You know,
Yes, he's doing doing this little 6 months up there. He called us the other day and stuff.
that's good.
So I think like that, like it'd be good for him because he gets to see, and then he already knows he doesn't want to do prison and jail out in California and stuff like that. And yeah, so I got him back in my life now,
That's good.
which is something I know he needs too.
Yeah, you both need it, and that's good. You guys reconnected, and he's with you. You know, maybe when he gets out this time, you know, he already said he doesn't want to do time in California. You know, feds were enough. You know, as he gets older, you know, our brains fully form and all that stuff, and you know, as you guys get to know each other too, I'm sure, you know, that'll be better too. But one thing I was thinking was, you had like gun charges. I'm surprised the feds never came at you.
Yeah, really, the feds, you're not catching a case with the feds unless it's like a modified, like if it's sawed off or got a switch or fully auto. That's when the feds get involved. But usually it's just state time. 16-2 or 3 is what they carry for it, for the gun charge. But he had caught his fed case because they were out there. They robbed gun shops and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's ballsy.
Yeah.
You know, robbing a gun. Like I got an AR, and apparently if I take the muzzle brake off, that's like 10 years. If I don't put like another one on because it's a 16-inch barrel, I didn't want it to 18 or 20. So
Yeah.
I'm like, oh fuck, man. You know, I was thinking about, you know, what I could do with it. Like, you know, not stupid, but just like, you know, what could I put on? But I got a really good muzzle brake on it. Hides flash real well. But 10 years for that, man. Like a lot of people don't know that. That's fucking nuts. You know, but then they make AR pistols, which doesn't make any fucking sense to me. That are legal. Yeah, they're like 12-inch barrels, like literally like
I think 8-inch or 10-inch.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I guess they don't want it to be like I'm guessing it'll be about a 15-inch barrel without the muzzle brake, and I mean M4s are 14 and a half. You know, so I guess they don't want that.
Back in the day, I had one, and it was a little AR I fitted into a backpack and zip it closed, and you couldn't tell what it was.
Yeah, dude, those things are, you just put the buttstock in, and it's literally like 2 feet long, 2.5, 3 feet.
Yeah, mine didn't even have the stock. It had the little round tube off the back.
Oh shit!
The spring. It was about like this big.
Oh man, so
not that big.
God, yeah, that really is like a pistol. You know, it's crazy. Some of these Fed laws, man, they don't make sense. I guess they just have them. You know, they have them, but it's crazy, man. But yeah, dude, I'm proud of you, man. You're doing good today. Hey, can I ask you a personal question about the tattoos?
Yeah.
What hurt the worst? Like I hear the ribs hurt the worst, but like,
the ribs weren't really that bad. Like I got everything, the whole body. My armpits didn't hurt. What hurt was like around the eyes, and like from having my head shaved so many years that it got like permanent sunburn. Like right here, right at the top is what hurt the worst.
Oh man. Damn. Yeah, I was just curious. No. But yeah, man. Hey, I wanna thank you very much for sharing your story, man. I really do appreciate it. And I'm glad you're still here, man, for your kids, for yourself, you know, having a good life.
I think what it was I had to do that big stretch of time, like doing 2 years at a time. You don't learn nothing because you're locked up and you're back out so fast that it doesn't affect you. It was, in a way, I'm glad that I caught the 12 years because that was enough time to sit and realize and be like, I'm good with all this.
Mm-hmm.
And even that, like 12 years went by quick. It seemed like maybe 2-3 years that I was in there is how it felt because I was constantly involved in so much shit.
Yeah. You were an idol, that's for sure. I had one more question I forgot to ask. The walk away, right? Like it's an honorable discharge. You know, you're not in bad standing. So can you? I mean, if it goes into politics, that you know, you don't have to answer it if it goes that way. But like, if you can, just you can say yes or no if you want to answer it.
Like, what do you mean?
Like, how did like the walkway, right? Like a lot of groups, you're there, right? You can't walk away from, but like I didn't even know you could walk away from like a skinhead group or anything like that because I don't know much about skins.
Well, that's basically like being a wood too, like pretty much white. Like the skinhead with when I told them that I was good, like the foundry gave me a hug, and so Stitch, and basically the only thing they said was like, if you get caught in any bullshit, like we just can't back you no more because you're not under our banner no more. But there was like no love lost. Like I seen him, I'd go out the yard, I'd see him and everything. And even when I switched prisons and then went back through there, the feeling wasn't any different. It was just, they knew like that it just wasn't in my heart no more.
Yeah.
And I'd never really been one that was big on the racist part of it. But I don't know.
Could you ever, would they ever welcome you back if God forbid, something happened?
If I wanted to go back, yeah, they'd let me go back.
Okay.
Yeah, they let me go back. No,
I was just
without any questions asked. It's just, I don't know. I was never big on the racist part of it. I was more of the family, like being part of something. And I knew from growing up that I wasn't going to be a northerner or anything like that because of being jumped by them so many times. And and then the incident with the blacks. And so that's what pushed me towards it. But because people ask like, oh, you're racist. And I'm like, how am I racist? My cousin that comes out every other weekend, he's black. My best friend, he lives 2 houses over, he's black. My nephew's half black. My daughter's half Mexican.
Yeah, it just people jump to assumptions. It just it's I think it's they don't understand. Now you do have hardcore racists in it doesn't matter, every faction, black, white, Mexican.
Oh yeah,
whatever.
for sure.
Yeah, so
I've met more blacks that are more racist than some of the whites.
Yeah,
and
I met.
They're more racist. I've met blacks that don't like other blacks, and then ones that don't like whites. I'm like, and then I met ones that only like whites and don't like other blacks. I'm like, crazy.
It's a waste of energy. Like when I was in Florida, I'd never been caught a cracker before. That I held the door open for the dude, and then like everyone was looking, like waiting for me to say something, and I just said, long story short, he didn't want to fight. So, it's a waste of energy. It's just a waste. But
all it is.
Oh yeah, it's just it tears apart families, and
And what do you really benefit out of it?
You do more harm to yourself.
Same with the gangs, all that stuff. You're not gaining nothing from it. You're putting yourself out there as a target, possibly going to prison for life or ending up dead. And then in the end, when you finally see the light and ready to leave, you haven't gained nothing financially from it. You can't take care of your family from it.
No 401k.
Nothing.
It's years and years ago, you could make money and stuff, but too much technology, too many people telling. Cops have.
You can't deposit that money into your bank. All sorts of stuff. You keep it in your house, and there's somebody out there that they come and try to take it.
Yeah. But it's shot out, man. The game's over.
Good manipulation game for those that started it, and bad for the ones that fall for it.
Yeah. But hey, brother, thank you very much, man. We'll stay in contact. I like you, dude. You're cool.
Oh,
man.
yeah.
Yeah. But
Hey, thank you for having me on your channel.
anytime, man. We'll do more videos and stuff,
All right.
whatever I can help you with, feel free to ask. I've been doing
All
this
right.
since 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. So I've been around the YouTube behind the scenes more than anything, So
Okay.
all right, brother. Thank you very much, man. You have a good night. And
You too.
I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll hit you up later.
All right. Thank you.
All right, man. Later, dude. All right. So that was one hell of a story, guys. I'm going to get this out to you as quick as I can. Have a good night.